Why is this important? Because in 2014, our dear friend Yasser Qadhi, I don't even want to call him a doctor anymore because I don't trust his academia. This Yasser Qadhi gentleman that used to live in Memphis, in 2014 did a lecture that caused a lot of confusion, and for the next 5 years after his lecture, every Q&A I would attend, people would ask me about the doubt that this gentleman spread about the history of Karbala. You see, he couldn't have it that all these people were turning Shia because they would learn the story of Abu Abdullah. So he had to make an apologetic version. And he would have to use sources that were so far removed from the incident to make his case. In 2014, he did a lecture called The Massacre at Karbala. And you could tell his whole intention was polemical in the sense that he was there to debate Shia. His lecture was not like, let me educate you on what happened to the grandson of the Prophet. His lecture ended with, we are the true Shias, and the Shias that cry for Hussein are the killers of Hussein. That's why they cry. That's how his lecture ended. 7 days ago, I got a link received that he did another lecture for Imam Hussein. You would think after 11 years, maybe he would add some more sources. Maybe he would go back and tie some loose ends. Maybe he would be a little bit more apologetic for the nonsense he spewed 11 years ago. Instead, he starts his lecture with the following. The original story of Imam Hussein alayhi salam were testimonies that were early Islamic, soon after the death of Imam Hussein, by a man who collected these narratives in the form of what we call maqtal, by Abi Makhnaf. In fact, the earliest sources we have regarding what happened on Ashura was from the testimonies that Abi Makhnaf was able to compile. Why? Because he was an early century scholar or Muslim, and he lived in Kufa. And many people, after the death of Imam Hussein, would live with the PTSD of what happened on that day. You see, you had the people that were from Yazid's army that participated. You had people that heard what happened. You had people whose family members were there. And so Abi Makhnaf would grow up and he would hear the testimonies of the people that were still alive from the incident. So this source, these maqtals, began being compiled within 60 years after the death of Imam Hussein. This is still within the century, and if people were still alive from the incident. Dr. Yasser Qadhi, our beloved academic in Islamic research, says, I'm not going to take a single one of Abi Makhnaf's works. Why? He's a Shia. Dr. Yasser Qadhi, are there any other sources around that time from non-Shias? No. Well, you as an academic have the opportunity to look at the closest source pertaining to Imam Hussein's death, but you choose not to. Why? Because Abi Makhnaf is a Shia. Did Abi Makhnaf say he's a Shia? Never. Did people think he was a Shia? Some did. Why did they think he was a Shia? Because he was sympathetic to the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So the only reason why we are stunted academically is because Abi Makhnaf seemed to have a soft spot for the Prophet's family, subhanAllah. So, Yasser Qadhi, instead, what did you use to go back to Karbala? What sources did you use to tell me about the tragedy of Imam Hussein? Very simple. For this lecture, I use Ibn Kathir and Ibn Hajar. How far removed are they from Karbala? Take a guess. How far along did Ibn Kathir even come into existence after? Give me a date. You think 100 years after Karbala? 200 years after Karbala? 300 years after Karbala? 5, 6, 7? 700 plus years after Karbala. Interesting, subhanAllah. You have first century sources, but you go 700 years later. Why? Because within those 700 years, a lot of nice things about the Umayyads came out. A lot of, those brothers love their excuses. In fact, I think the whole religion is based on excuses. A lot of excuses came out that Yazid didn't know, it was an accident. Hussein shouldn't have done that. So this is how he dictates the events surrounding Karbala. He tries to make it a political mistake. It wasn't that big a deal. But in the beginning, he'll say, we love Ahlul Bayt. But we won't take from the ones that love Ahlul Bayt as well. So this academic dishonesty leads us down a course of why do we today as Muslims who believe in the one final religion from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the one final prophet, why are we always arguing? Today, the arguments have gotten far more rampant and convoluted, so much so that people can't even agree within their sects what they believe. And this is normal, as Allah says in the Quran, and when we gave the nation knowledge, they began to quarrel. They began to fight. And it only is a matter of time as more information gets translated. You know, we have the advent of sunnah.com, a very filtered version of Sunni hadith. We have thaqalain.net. You can just type in anything and get the full hadith from our hadith sources. The more information becomes available, the more people fight. And you would think the more information comes out, we would be in a place of, certainty. But it's actually doing the opposite. And what is clear time and again is that people don't know how to even read hadith. They don't know where to look for knowledge, and they don't know how to come to a conclusion. And I don't blame you, because these members, unfortunately, they come and they tell you the same story over and over again instead of equipping you with the tools to overcome this. Now, one thing that's coming out that's going to be in our favor is the critical historical method, or historical critical method. Let's remove the bias. You see, for example, we have a bias that we want to look for what agrees with us. And then, the other side has a bias in what agrees with them. Now assume we take all that bias out, and now we are in the search for the truth. We want to know, did the Prophet really say this? Did the Prophet really marry a 9-year-old? Did he really say to Fatima, Fatima, you are like the beggars on the street to me. Leave me, I won't get you a servant. Did he say these things? Because right now the narratives are splintered. Everybody has their own version of Rasulullah. And we act like everyone's on the same page. A prophet on one end that makes mistakes and needs advisement of his companions. The other side, the infallible prophet that is wahyun yuha, who speaks only revelation to his people. On one end, we have people that say that the Prophet ﷺ makes mistakes, that doesn't know what he's doing. And in fact, they say he's illiterate. Why do they say he's illiterate? Because then it gives more credence in the Quran being a miracle. Because for some reason, if our prophet's illiterate, the Quran becomes more magnificent. Does it change the Quran if the prophet was literate or not? Oh no, you see, Brother Hadi, we're trying to make him illiterate so his miracle becomes more manifest in people's minds. Because when a person who has a mental retardation that can't physically take a pen to paper makes or recites a Quran, it makes it more of a miracle. So where do we start when our core of our history is relying on different patterns and ideas and views of the Holy Prophet to begin with? Where should we start? See, the first set as a Shia, when we were growing up, when I was in grade 12, someone introduced me to this book called Then I Was Guided. Then I Was Guided by Al-Tijani was a book about a Tunisian respected scholar who was from the Sunni faith. And he got exposed to the Shia belief. And he had many questions. He said to himself, you know what? I'm going to do a method to find the truth. The method he applied was, if something is in a Sunni book and the Shia book agrees with it, or there is there is a parallel between them, I will accept it. Because they're both on the same page. If one thing is in a Shia book but not in a Sunni book, I won't accept. And if there's something in a Sunni book but not in a Shia book, I won't accept. Fair game? After he used this approach, it turns out that he found that the merits of the Ahlul Bayt, even within Sunni books, are too many to count. And the amount of contradictions in the character of the early companions were too much to count. There was no consistency. So then he decides that he wants to turn to the religion or the sect that has the Ahlul Bayt at its core. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So this becomes almost like a proto-critical historian in Islam. You see, a lot of times people ask me, well, how did people not notice in 1924 this Cairo script became the mainstream Quran? Nobody noticed we had 1,300 years of Quranic history? Well, the truth is, academic scholars had no interest in Islam back then. In 1924, they weren't studying Islam. In fact, it wasn't until 1979 that people even noticed there's something called Shiaism. People didn't even know what a Shia was in 1970. That's not too far long ago. Some people here are born before that. Nobody even knew what a Shia was. So when Al-Tijani did this, he did us a favor. He showed that there's a methodology that you can apply to try to look for the truth. Was it perfect? Far from it. What he didn't do is he was unable to show that the hadith and the Shia corpus by themselves, independent of Sunni sources, had any merit. And so you almost threw the baby out with the bathwater. How on earth are you supposed to know other things? You know, in fact, one of the youth just a few years ago came up to me and asked me a question. He said, Brother Hadi, what do we think of this matter? And I said, this is what Imam Sadiq says. He says, okay, well, where can I find that in Bukhari? I said, why do you need to find it in Bukhari? He's like, well, how am I going to prove it to my Sunni friend? And I'm just looking at him. Your religion is not predicated on a Sunni's approval. Do you understand that Ahlul Bayt are the closest to the Prophet and the inheritance of his knowledge? Why do you have to get someone's approval? And that's when I realized, again, the methodology is flawed. People are looking at what's in another sect's book in order to reconcile what's in their own books. So we have to take it a step further. We have to see when hadith collection even began. Now, cue in an academic scholar that's recently made a lot of headlines. From Oxford University, Dr. Joshua Little. Dr. Joshua Little is single-handedly changing the way people look at hadith. Like, you don't understand what I'm saying. He is a tsunami. His research is so thorough and so staggeringly damaging to the scholars of hadith that they themselves are having panic attacks. His research indicates one important thing. None of the hadith of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah can be traced back to the Prophet. Not a single one. How? But they have chains and narrators. Not a single hadith can go directly to the Prophet. What does that mean for us? Get ready. All those hadith you memorize, they're not going to take you anywhere. You know, it's almost relieving, like you had all these mental gymnastics. People go to Hyde Park and they debate, look what's in your book, look what's in your book. Well, have you even thought about whether or not those hadith you're talking about even go back to the Holy Prophet? So, Dr. Joshua Little, you can actually access his podcasts and his paper, and do you know what his dissertation was? The true marital age of Aisha. He, with his research and analysis of hadith, is able to triangulate when a hadith started being mentioned. That's pretty interesting. We can see in what century the first person to say a hadith came. And Aisha's age hadith comes 150 years after the Prophet's death. Well, this is interesting. Well, who on earth said it? Did Aisha say it? No, we can't trace it back to her. Well, where did it come from? Iraq. This guy moved from Medina to Iraq. His name is Hisham ibn Urwa. Well, what was happening in Iraq? A lot of debates. So what did he do? He created a narrative. Why? Because he wanted to create Aisha as a political figure of purity and so on and so forth. So what did he do? He created a chain that goes back to his father and directly to Aisha. And nobody was the wiser. Hisham ibn Urwa is the common link to every dubious hadith that we have had to suffer for at the hands of the Christians. You come after me because of the Quranic preservation, but you're not worried about the Jews and the Christians coming to us and questioning the honor of your prophet and saying he married a 6-year-old? Like, it doesn't bother you? So what do Muslims do? First they come and say, she could have hit puberty at the age of 9. Yeah, but he was over 50. And she was 6. And then the narrations get even worse. You think it's just a marriage? She talks about the adventures while they're bathing together. They talk about the sanctity of your prophet. They humiliate your prophet with their books. And you have a reason now through academia to just say, Dr. Joshua Little. I've done it. You know how many Christians? What people don't know about me is that when I learn things and I go and test it out, I go into webinars and chat rooms, and that's where I hone my craft. I put it against them. So every time a Christian walks in a room and starts making fun of Islam, I just say, have you seen Dr. Joshua Little's research? No. Have you seen his dissertation? No. So wait, are you telling me that the Prophet didn't marry a 9-year-old? Absolutely. Well, what age was she? Probably around 20, because she actually recounts things of early Islam before Islam was even about. Well, then where did this come from? Fabrication. Well, how did it end up in every book of hadith? Well, let's then take a look at Dr. Joshua Little's research on 21 staggering facts on why none of the hadith of Ahl Sunnah go back to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Before I pull out the facts, let's recite the loudest of your salawat. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. From these 21, I don't have enough time to go through all of them, so forgive me. I picked the top 8. Inshallah, I'll get through them very fast, and then we can head towards tonight's musibah. As you know, the first point that he makes, and this is actually point number 7 out of 21, but for me, I just picked them in the order of my importance to this audience. He says there were reports of mass fabrications at the start of early hadith compilation. What do I mean? After the Prophet died, do you think people were using hadith? A hadith is a narration of the Prophet. What did the first 2 caliphs do? Burn them. Don't speak of them. Why? Because the preservation of the Quran is more important than the hadith. So by the time the earlier hadith compilers start, do you know how many years have passed? Over 100 years after the Prophet's death. Now, after 100 years, people are saying, well, maybe we should try and see what the Prophet said. We kind of got the Umayyads taking over the religion. We killed Hussein. You know, the world's going to die. You know, the Abbasids are doing an upward. This is during all this time, right? The hadith collectors start going, okay, well, our leaders are telling us to start writing things down. I think it's time for us to start writing things down. It might be important. So what happens now is the first one that we can see that Dr. Joshua Little uses is a scholar who died in 110 after Hijrah, Ibn Sirin. And he's talking about the concept of isnad. Isnad in the hadith collection is a sanad, is like, where did you get that from? So if I say, Prophet Muhammad said, grapes are good for you, and you go, Brother Hadi, where did you get that from? And then I say, Salman told me. And I say, who told Salman? His sister Ilaf told him. Well, who told Ilaf? Well, her husband said it. Okay, well then, how did that go back to the Prophet? Well, that's the best I got right now. So, in any case, Ibn Sirin has a quote in his book, they did not ask about where a hadith came from. They didn't ask for the sanad. But when the fitna occurred in the civil war, they said, name your men, and those who belong to Ahl Sunnah, their hadith was accepted. And those who were from Ahl Bidah, or people of innovations, their hadith was left behind. Another scholar, Al-Khatib Baghdadi, says, the amount of lies increased so much, and he died in the year 463 after Hijrah. So early scholars of hadith are just telling you, we don't know who to trust. So imagine how many lies were woven together to bury the truth of Imam al-Hussein. You see, whenever I say Yasir Qadi, instead of taking the preliminary sources, take sources from 700 years later, imagine the shameless lying over the course of 700 years that Ibn Sirin in 110 AH is saying, everyone's just playing their own game. Everybody has their own biases. Number two, absence in early sources. For the first 100 years, the earliest Quran commentaries, lectures, legal decisions never mentioned hadith. I'm going to say that again. For the first 100 years after the Prophet's death, nobody used hadith. Not for Quran commentary, not for judging and making decisions. You wonder where Yazid came from? You ever think about that? Muawiyah made his own hadith. Those who fight in a battle at Constantinople, God forgives all their sins. He sent his son there. Now you have Yazid as the Khalif. It was so easy. It was so easy. Just make it up. And who are we going to reference this from? We don't have any books. Who are we going to go back to? No one. Someone said it. Well, where did you get that? I don't know. Muawiyah said it, so it's got to be true. That is the abysmal state of hadith. You wonder why we keep fighting. We've created our own mental playgrounds to keep fighting each other in. All along, our enemies sit back. These Zionists, look at these Muslims. They can never come to a conclusion. They love it. In fact, my advice to you from this day on, if anyone starts talking about hadith, just stop. Don't waste your time. Because you have to go into their ignorance and start fighting them there. Come out. I'm giving you a ticket out. Don't fight people on Aisha's age. Don't fight people on how the Prophet was infallible. Leave. Just leave them. All right. Number three, later terms and institutions started coming. Some hadith talk about things that did not exist during the Prophet's times, words, events, and sectarian concepts. So for example, there's a hadith saying, the Prophet is saying, Baghdad is the best city. Baghdad didn't exist then. But there's hadith attributed to the Prophet where he speaks like that. Or the Prophet saying, oh Ali, there will be a people that will love you so much. This is an Ibn Taymiyyah hadith, by the way. They will love you so much. Those people are the worst of people. If you see them, kill them. This is where Ibn Taymiyyah says spilling the blood of the Rafida is better than spilling wine. Number four, the concept of isnads arose way too late. So you know how today they say, where did you get a hadith? They say there's a chain of narrators. Do you know when they started putting the chains in? First 100 years, nobody asked where the hadith came from. So by the time they started putting chains in hadith, too many lines, too many lies, too little, too late. How could you trace that back to the Prophet? How could you trace anything back to the Prophet when nobody asked what they're hearing? Where did you get it from for the first 100 years? The criteria was, the Prophet said so. Well, how do I know? He just said so. 100 years it took for Muslims to go like, I think I should double check. So after they started double checking, they're like, oh, maybe this goes back to the Prophet. Maybe. So you have a very big maybe in our hadith sources. This is very bad. This is very bad for the people that rely their whole religion on hadith. In fact, there's a whole creed called Ahl Hadith that take the hadith of Bukhari and Muslim and predicate their whole belief structure on those hadith that don't go back to the Prophet. Well, this is interesting for us Shia, isn't it? Because we have like these books like Peshawar Nights, where there's a debater against 5 different other brothers of Ahl Sunnah, and he tells them, well, Abu Huraira is not a legitimate source. They say, why? Well, he only met the Prophet for 2 years and he was a known liar and all that. And they say, okay, well, we can concede to that. I'm not telling you Abu Huraira is not a valid source. I'm saying Abu Huraira didn't say the hadith to begin with. That's what Joshua Little is saying. Joshua Little is saying Abu Huraira was just a fill in the blank. We can't take it even back to Abu Huraira, the companion of the Prophet that was a former Jew that lived with the Prophet for 2 years and came out with 3, 4, 5,000 hadith on behalf of the Prophet. So Bukhari used fill in the blanks hadith, but I thought Bukhari is a hadith critic. Bukhari, 280 years after the Prophet's death, was a critic of hadith. So he created a criteria to say these hadith are authentic. But then it just so happens, point number 5, just because a hadith is authentic doesn't make it true. What? Just because a hadith is sahih doesn't make it true? Dr. Joshua Little found criterion of hadith that would make them authentic, except that they go against the Quran. Well, what's the first rule? If it goes against the Quran, toss it. But your criterion says it's authentic. Well, that's a big boo-boo, isn't it? All right, we keep continuing. We're on point number 6 now. Contradictions galore. This one is my favorite. For every hadith you find, there is an opposite hadith. An opposite contradictory hadith. For every hadith you find in Ahl Sunnah that Imam Ali is praised, there is another hadith where Abu Bakr is praised higher than him. For every hadith that you say that the Quran was preserved, there is a hadith that says the Quran wasn't preserved. For every hadith on every subject you want to find, that's why the debates never end. Because the Shia, he's mukhlis, he's trying to go in their books and he finds something that aligns with their faith. But then you give it to the Sunni and they go, I have a different hadith. I'll give you my favorite one. When I was 18, I was in this little halaqah and I didn't know at the time their youth leader was Wahhabi. He said something very disrespectful about Sayyidah Fatima. And me, 18 years old, with nothing except Fadak and Ashura in my head, I went up there and I started saying, doesn't your book say Fatima is from me and I am from Fatima, whoever hurts her hurts me? He goes, oh, do you know where that's from? And he had the biggest grin on his face, this Wahhabi clear. I said, what? He said, Ali and Fatima got in a little karfarful. This is the word he used. Karfarful. I'll never forget that word because I've never heard it before. Ali and Fatima got in a little fight. And the Prophet said it to Ali. For every hadith you use, there's an opposite hadith. Contradictions galore. And finally, I'm going to skip point number 7 because we need to dim the lights and go towards tonight's musibah, inshaAllah ta'ala. May Allah bless you all for your patience. The last one is that all of the Sunni hadith collectors, like Ibn Salah and Al-Nawawi say, no one can know all the fabricated hadith. Al-Nawawi says, a sahih hadith does not imply certainty. The hadith can be sahih, yet contradict the Quran. If you can't discern what is a truth and what is a lie, how can we build our faith based on these criteria? Brothers and sisters, academia is becoming our friend because they're not Shia. Dr. Joshua Little is not Muslim. Inshallah, we can dim the lights. Are we not dimming the lights for the Muslim? Dr. Joshua Little is not a Shia. If he was a Shia, they'd say, don't listen to him. His research is half-cooked. Yeah? Sometimes I think if that Zionist country was a Shia country, they would have been wiped out a long time ago. Our only crime is that we're Shia. We fight for justice while being Shia. May Allah bless the ones that time and again rose up in the face of oppression. May Allah bless the ones that were pioneers of thinking, the ones that would be the Imam's companions and not worry about their lives because of the books that they wrote. Those like Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Sayyari, who wrote one of the earliest texts on Kitab al-Qira'at, where he showed the variant reading straight from the Imams, who had to fear for his life during the Abbasid regime, that he would be killed for even writing this book. And you know what his reward was in the end, brothers and sisters? This man who dedicated his life to preservation of the Quran, reading from the Ahlul Bayt. You know what his reward was? That later Shia scholars, in order to gain fame, had to curse him and say he is not from us. That was his reward. His reward is at the end, they called him an exaggerator, and we are not from him, and we don't even know him. Such a thankless position to be in, to write books in a time of your life being on the line, and at the end people don't even appreciate your book. That they don't even accept your book, and only scholars who were sincere and were trying to get the message out, like Al-Kulayni in Kitab al-Kafi includes hadith from As-Sayyari, but the rest of the scholars, in order to prove their position, didn't. May Allah bless the ones that were fearless. On this night, the master of our ceremony is none other than Qasim ibn al-Hassan. We speak of fearlessness, but sometimes we forget that even a 13-year-old boy can teach a grown man to be fearless. That even whenever a 13-year-old boy is confronted with an army trained in the art of the blade, he can stand up to them and he can introduce himself with a battle cry that would be known for generations to come. As you know, the story of Qasim is a very sad story. Qasim was only 13. You know, when Imam Hussein used to miss his brother Hassan, he would go to Qasim, Imam Hassan's son, and they say, you know, he would just smell his head sometimes. You know, sometimes when you lose a sibling and you look at their children and their movements remind you of that sibling you once had. You want to remember your sibling, and then the footsteps and the way they walk and the way they talk make you remember of the time when your brother was young. Imam Hussein's best friend was Imam Hassan. He could recollect memories of the times that they used to play in the mosque. When he would look at Qasim ibn al-Hassan, Imam Hussein's heart would remember his brother and how he lost his brother only a few years before Karbala happened. As you know, Imam Hassan was poisoned by his wife, and when Imam Hussein would be at his deathbed, he would be crying for Imam al-Hassan. But the narrations say something even sadder, that while Imam Hassan kept throwing up over and over, he kept crying when he looked at Hussein. Imam Hussein said, "Oh Hassan, why is it that you cry?" He says, "Ya Aba Abdullah, la yawmak yawmak ya Aba Abdullah." Oh Hussein, there is no day like yours. Where will you be once I am gone? So you know, now it's the 10th of Muharram, brothers and sisters. May Allah bless you. May Allah bless you for the 10th of Muharram, when the swords began to cling on that afternoon, and the companions of Imam al-Hussein had fallen, and now only the close relatives of Imam al-Hussein are left. Abbas has fallen, Ali al-Akbar has fallen, but nothing breaks my heart more than the 13-year-old boy that walks up to Hussein and he says, "Ammu, I want to go fight on your behalf. behalf as well. Imam Hussein says, Qasim, you're the remainder of my brother. Go sit down. I don't wish to see something happen to you. He comes back over and over until Farwa gives him a letter and says, go give this to your uncle. Imam Hussein takes the letter from Qasim. He reads, oh Hussein, on that day I wasn't able to join you, but please take my sons. Imam Hussein looks at Qasim, Ya Qasim, Habibi, Nur al-Aini, remembrance of my brother. Do you know what awaits you out there? Your life. You are headed towards your death with what you ask. Qasim says a line that I wish every Shia would tattoo on their hearts. Qasim says, death is sweeter to me than honey. Imam Hussein holds Qasim according to the Maqtal. I read in Luhuf by Sayyid ibn Tawus that Imam Hussein held Qasim in a way that they both began to cry, and the cry kept getting louder and louder until even the woman came out and began to cry. Imam Hussein tied Qasim with the turban. He put the armor on Qasim's little body, this little 13-year-old. You know what they say? That when Imam Hussein put this armor on Qasim's body, it began to slide off because it was too big for his little body. They say when he grabbed the sword in his hand, he had to use both hands to carry the sword. They placed Qasim on the horse, and they said that he was so short that his legs would be floating on the sides of the horse, and they wouldn't reach the stirrups for him to place his feet. And then Qasim is about to head to the battlefield. You know what happens? The women come around the horse as if they know this is the last time they're going to be seeing Qasim. They start holding the horse, and his mother Farwa comes and says, oh Qasim, you're the remembrance, you're the remainder of your father that I have. How will I remember Hassan once you're gone? You know what he says? He says, oh mother, I'm about to go and join my father Al-Hassan. Do not deprive me of this honor, oh mother. He goes and he starts fighting. You know what he says when he joins them in the battlefield? He begins to roar like a lion, like a descendant of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, in tankuruni fa ana ibn al-Hasan. For those that don't know me, I am the son of Hassan. The enemy becomes embarrassed that a little boy is fighting for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Qasim takes out his sword and begins to swing. He starts to kill a few. He's getting better at the battle as it's going until the enemy devised the plan. Umar ibn Sa'ad said, get him in a circle. Get them in a circle. Whenever the horse became surrounded, they say the horse began to get confused which direction to go. And then one of the men with an iron mace hit Qasim right on the head. They say that the skull of Qasim snapped open when he received this shot. In this moment, Qasim lost his balance from the horse, and they say his foot became stuck on the side of the stirrup of the horse. He became so disoriented, he called out to Imam al-Hussein, Assalamu alayka ya Hussein. Ammu, come help me. Come help me. Imam Hussein heard Qasim. He got on his horse. They say never was Hussein in this kind of desperation in this moment. He began to charge towards Qasim. But by the time he got to Qasim's body, brothers and sisters, the dust had taken over his head. And while the blood was coming from his forehead, the dust was covering his face. The rest of his body was covered in lacerations. One of them say that his spine was almost cut in half. Imam Hussein saw his little nephew like this. Do you know how Imam Hussein had to return him, brothers and sisters? May Allah give you patience for what I say next. They say Imam Hussein took the body and he tried to pick it up. But when he would pick it up, one piece would fall down from one side and the other piece would fall from the other. Imam Hussein unshrouds his abaya. You see what I'm wearing? wearing like this. Imam Hussein takes his abba like this, brothers and sisters. And he takes the pieces of Qasim and puts it in a little pouch. Do you know how he rode his horse back with Qasim? He took his pouch and put it over his shoulder like this on the horse, and he returned it back to the camp. Ala la'natullahi qawm al-zalimin wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi al-tahirin. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Qasim.
يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين
يا حسين
يا حسين
يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين ابوالفضل ای علم دارم ابوالفضل ای علم دارم ابوالفضل ای علم دارم تو را دارم چه غم دارم تو را دارم چه غم دارم تمام لشکرم عباس تمام لشکرم عباس پناه یاورم عباس میان لشکر دشمن امید آخرم عباس ابوالفضل ای علم دارم ابوالفضل ای علم دارم ابوالفضل ای علم دارم توی صاحب لوای من امیر با وفای من به هر جا همراهم بودی به هر جا همراهم بودی برادر پا به پای من بودی ابوالفضل ای علم دارم ابوالفضل ای علم دارم ابوالفضل ای علم دارم تو را دوست دارم تو را دوست دارم تمام هست من عباس تمام هست من عباس دلت پا بست من عباس الا ای می روی دستم الا ای می روی دستم تو بودی دست من عباس ابوالفضل ای علم دارم ابوالفضل ای علم دارم یا حسین
کربلا 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 ہے کربلا جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے روضائے شبیر پر دوں گا دعا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے، جانے والے کربلا کے مجھے، ہے جہاں گنجے شہیداں، ہے جہاں نہر فرات، ہے جہاں گنجے شہیداں، ہے جہاں نہر فرات، جس جگہ سید میرا پیاسا رہا لے چل مجھے، جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے، جس جگہ جاگی تھی قسمت حر کی وہ دیکھوں گا میں، جس جگہ جاگی تھی قسمت حر کی وہ دیکھوں گا میں، آسیوں پر کیسے ہوتی ہے عطا لے چل مجھے، جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے، جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے مجھے، اس قدر نادار ہوں زادے سفر کچھ بھی نہیں، اس قدر نادار ہوں زادے سفر کچھ بھی نہیں، دوش پر اپنے بٹھا کر اے حوالے چل مجھے، جانے والے کربلا لے چل مجھے، جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے، جس جگہ عباس کے بازو قلم ہو کر گرے، جس جگہ عباس کے بازو قلم ہو کر گرے، اس جگہ میں بھی کروں ماتم ذرا لے چل مجھے، جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا 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 لے چل مجھے، روزائے
شبیر پر شاد رہے کربلا، آباد رہے کربلا، دل کی یہ دعا ہے آ حسین، شاد رہے کربلا، آباد رہے کربلا، دل کی یہ دعا ہے آ حسین، شاد رہے کربلا، آباد رہے کربلا، دل کی یہ دعا ہے آ حسین، سلسلہ در سلسلہ، سلسلہ در سلسلہ، جاری رہے گی صدا حسین، شاد رہے کربلا، آباد رہے کربلا، دل کی یہ دعا ہے آ حسین، شاد رہے آباد رہے کربلا، دل کی یہ دعا ہے آ حسین، بادشاہ حسین کی سلطنت ہے کربلا، جس کا پاسبان ہے مولا غازی باوفا، آپ نے حسین باخدا خون سے سجا دی کربلا، کربلا کی اے خدا شان یہ رہے صدا، دل کی یہ دعا ہے آ حسین، شاد رہے کربلا، آباد رہے کربلا، دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین شاد رہے
کربلا باد رہے کربلا
دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین مولا نے بسا دیا ایسا شہر کربلا جس کی خاک بھی شفا جس کی جنتی فضا دوسری نہ ہوگی کربلا ہوگا نہ حسین دوسرا ہوں گے نہ کبھی جدا اب حسین و کربلا دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین شاد رہے کربلا آباد رہے کربلا دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین شاد رہے کربلا آباد رہے کربلا دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین زندہ باد یا حسین زندہ باد پنجتن کے پانچویں نور عین زندہ باد مرحبا حسین مرحبا آپ نے کمال کر دیا عظمتوں کے بادشاہ آپ کی رہے عطا دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین شاد رہے کربلا آباد رہے کربلا دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین شاد رہے کربلا آباد رہے کربلا دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین سلسلہ در سلسلہ سلسلہ در سلسلہ جاری رہے گی صدا حسین شاد رہے کربلا آباد رہے کربلا دل کی یہ دعا ہے یا حسین یا حسین
یا عباس ہر دل نے پکارا یا عباس 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 یا عباس ہر دل کا سہارا یا عباس یا عباس ہر دل کا سہارا یا عباس یا عباس ہر دل نے پکارا یا عباس ہو جاتا ہے جوش اثر پیدا ہو جاتا ہے جوش اثر پیدا سن سن کے نام تمہارا یا عباس سن سن کے نام تمہارا یا عباس یا عباس ہر دل نے پکارا یا عباس یا عباس ہر دل نے پکارا یا عباس عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار شہنشاہ مدینہ عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار شہنشاہ مدینہ عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار شہنشاہ مدینہ عباس علمدار شہنشاہ مدینہ یا عباس یا سیدی یا عباس یا عباس یا عباس اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد